not that they have actually committed a crime. And the evidence doesn't actually have to be shown against them. He's following in the footsteps of George Bush when he started the military commissions tribunals for detainees, and the Patriot Act was first written, and that one included American citizens. So, all you civil libertarians out there, congratulations, you've got a real star. Disgusting. Now, since President Obama mentioned this nominee's intellect, perhaps we should mention that said intellect was incapable of seeing the problems of a very big case that we've been dealing with for quite a while. This man who represents how American society has finally recognized that prejudice is over. Well, evidently it's not over in government, because he just nominated a woman to the Supreme Court who likes to prejudge people based on their skin color. Yeah, here's the story. It's about discrimination and reverse discrimination caused by the positivist approach that government should be giving people services and should try to overlook skills when hiring people to provide those services. And they should instead focus on skin color or sex or religion when they make their decisions. I refer, of course, to the case of Ricci versus DeStefano. It's a suit brought by firefighters against the government of New Haven, Connecticut for reverse discrimination. I'll give you some background on that one. In February 2008, Judge Sonia Sontamayor, Barack Obama's May 26, 2009 pick for the Supreme Court, joined the unsigned opinion of a 3-judge panel of the Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals to uphold a lower court's decision to reject a racial discrimination lawsuit that had been filed by one Hispanic firefighter and 19 white firefighters against the city of New Haven, Connecticut. The 20 firefighters were hopeful contenders for 15 open captain and lieutenant positions. In the lawsuit, the firefighters claimed they were denied promotion based on their race when the city of New Haven discarded a 2003 promotion exam because not a single black firefighter received a score on the exam that met the requirement to qualify to earn a promotion. 77 firefighters took the test. 27 were black firefighters. The city of New Haven cited the Civil Rights Act of 1964 as a legal response to decide not to use the test and not to promote any firefighters. The New Haven Fire Department has a staff of about 411, with 360 personnel serving in fire suppression and emergency medical services. New Haven is the third largest municipality in Connecticut after Bridgeport and Hartford, with a population of about 124,000 people. The lead plaintiff in the case was Frank Ricci, who had been a firefighter at the New Haven Fire Department for 11 years. Firefighter Frank Ricci gave up a second job to get time to study for the test. Because he has dyslexia, of course, he was probably taught in the public schools, and it's very, very questionable as to whether or not he has any physiological problems or he just wasn't taught phonetic reading. A large proportion of people diagnosed with dyslexia have no physiological problems at all. In fact, they can never prove physiological damage or problems with dyslexia. Usually the problem has to do with the fact that they were taught look-say reading, whole language reading, sight word reading, rather than phonics. But anyway, let's get back to this man and his immediate problem, not the problem that was foisted on him by other government institutions called schools. Anyway, he paid an acquaintance $1,000 to read his textbooks onto audio tapes. Firefighter Ricci also made flashcards, took practice tests, worked with a study group, and participated in mock interviews. His commitment to studying resulted in him ranking the 6th highest score among firefighters who took the test. The city of New Haven discarded the test results to avoid an anticipated Civil Rights Act of 1964 Title VII disparate impact lawsuit brought by minority firefighters because, of course, they would claim that the test was racially prejudicial. The decision came after a rabble-rousing African-American minister, Reverend Boise Kimber, with close ties to the mayor, disrupted meetings, pressured the city's civil service board, and warned of dire political consequences if the city promoted persons from the list generated by the exams. Of course, because the exams were racial. And what can you do? Well, Judge Sotomayor was chastised by fellow Clinton appointee Judge Jose Cabranes for taking extraordinary measure to ignore and throw out claims of unfair treatment raised by the firefighters. Judge Sotomayor's panel heard a case raising important questions under Civil Rights Act of 1964 Title VII and Equal Protection Law, but attempted to dispose of the firefighters' arguments in a summary order. The summary order was refuted by Judge Jose Cabranes, who is the second Puerto Rican to be appointed as a judge of the United States Court of Appeals. Whatever. Judge Jose Cabranes was also considered to be for the seat of the Supreme Court of the United States that went to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Yes, indeed. She gets plenty of sleep while she's there in court. Defenders of the city, and by the way, that's not a slight against her personally, but, she tends to sleep sometimes in court, and it's kind of sad. Defenders of the city of New Haven's decision to discard the test claimed that the test developed by Industrial Organizational Solutions Incorporated was poorly constructed. Terminology of the test questions and answers was not specific to the language or terminology that is used locally in New Haven. For example, the use of the words uptown or downtown are not used in New Haven, but they were used in the test. Yeah, so how is that racially motivated? Anyway, so you can see that Sotomayor seems to think that there is something important about race. Now, the obvious point here is that the judge, like Sandra Day O'Connor and many other leftists, believe that as opposed to what Martin Luther King said, government should judge people by the color of their skin, not the content of their character. Clearly, this is a noxious approach. Now, the obvious point here is that Judge Sotomayor, like Sandra Day O'Connor and many other leftists, believe that government, as opposed to what Martin Luther King Jr. used to say, government should judge people by the color of their skin, not the content of their character. This is clearly an absolutely noxious approach. But even more important is, that we pierce the veil and see that government shouldn't be in the business of hiring people for anything. Government shouldn't be in business because it's funded by theft. All government functions are services we could purchase freely if we really wanted, and no one would be forced to pay. Now, on the surface, I think many people can see that if tax money is used to fund a service, it should be colorblind in its hiring for that service. But guess what? As much as we might not like it, or as much as it bothers us, some people having their tax money taken from them might want a certain kind of person hired. A black man being taxed might say, hey, I want more black people as cops. I'd like that. I'd feel safer, he might say. Or a woman might say, I'd like more female firefighters out there in the force, even though they're generally not as capable of doing the physical labor that the job entails. And the key is that their tax money is being taken through force. Should their preferences for their own money be overlooked? Should they be subsumed? And what about yours? That's the problem we encounter when government exists for whatever reason, to police the streets, to fight fires, to tend a cemetery. And that's what is missed here when people play this racial quota argument, this discrimination, reverse discrimination card, and they step into the boxing arena of government. It pits one victim of robbery against another. How about we just stop the robbery? Now I'll give you another good example of this phenomenon, and for that, we turn to the home of Radio Birdman. And Mothy Space, the native land of our friend Darren Register, now the man behind the Hobgoblin Pub in Bath, England. We turn to Australia and this tantalizing report.
A sunny afternoon on a beach in Sydney, and hundreds have come to relax and soak up the sun. But trouble is brewing for those who get too relaxed, because Conservative politicians and a Christian morals campaigner want to clamp down on topless sunbathing. Those who want to tan without strap marks may find they're banned from beaches in the whole of New South Wales. Australian morals campaigner Reverend Fred Nile believes women degrade themselves by exposing too much.
She demeans herself. I believe that she's taken away her own self-respect, and I'd say any of the men around that area would not have any respect for that girl and probably would think that she's cheap and maybe even trying to pick up somebody.
Conservative politician Dave Clark believes children would be offended by seeing women's breasts.
Children here today but can't because they're concerned about their children seeing it.
But locals find the proposed ban unbelievable and ridiculous.
He's still breastfed. He sees it all the time and it doesn't faze us at all.
I think topless bathing is mega.
How often do you bathe topless?
Every sunny day, probably.
Nobody ever complains about topless bathing. They just don't complain.
Australians love their suntans, and topless sunbathing has been common on most beaches since the 1960s. Sunbathers in Sydney will have to wait and see whether a new, more prudent